You've all heard of dad jokes, right? The real groaners like, do you know why pirates can't finish reciting the alphabet? Because they get lost at sea. Or, what does Darth Vader exhale? Carbon dioxide. Or, apparently you can't use beef stew as a password. It's not stroganoff. I mean, you get the picture, right? We've all heard those. Well, what would you say if I told you that there are pastor jokes? And no, not like those like cheesy little Timmy jokes that and one-liners that, so often get the ball rolling during the first few seconds of a sermon, kind of like what I'm doing right now, but not. Um, but also as pastors, we don't get opening acts. We don't have anyone to like warm up the crowd. We just go in cold, right? So sometimes we need a joke to break the ice. But that's not what I'm talking about here. These are kind of like dad jokes because they're definitely groaners, but they're way more niche and nerdy. So one example is, and Jesus said unto the theologians, who do you say that I am? And they replied, you are the eschatological manifestation of the ground of our being, the charisma of which we find the ultimate meaning in our interpersonal relationships. And Jesus said, what? Right? So that's a knee slapper right there, right? Okay. Well, this week there's a pastor joke that always comes up when we hit Lent 2 in year A. Inevitably, somebody will refer to this morning's gospel as, you ready for this? Oh man, I don't know if you're ready for this. Nick at Night. And what's interesting is that dad jokes are kind of like the equalizer of jokes. There's this like super low threshold for getting it. They're the low-hanging fruit of the pun world. Pastor jokes, as you probably noticed, are a little bit more exclusive. Not everyone would find them hilarious because they require some really exclusive behaviors, like deep dives into theological language or having a master of divinity or maybe too much free time on your hands. I don't know. And while I love me a good pastor joke, I am struck by how in-group versus out-group they can be. And I know that you've experienced this, right? Like whatever your industry or your passion is, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Once someone who I knew who was a classic car enthusiast made a joke about spark plugs and was equating them to the way that their hands felt after putting on this lotion. And I was lost. I was like, that's funny. Because I couldn't even really pick out spark plugs from a lineup of car parts, let alone understand what they have to do with lotion. Some of you with more experience with cars are probably laughing right now because apparently the joke was funny, maybe. And the joke meant that it felt greasy. Does that make sense? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. It might not even be a funny joke, but they were laughing. I still don't know if it's funny. And it's been 20 years since that conversation. Clearly not understanding that joke still keeps me up at 3 a.m., right? Yeah. And that's kind of where I'm going with this. It's like this insider language or exclusivity, the Nick at Night. Anyway, so in today's gospel, we are confronted with two concepts that have become this like in-club and out-club delineator. We see them used in our modern context pretty frequently. They are these super quick, easy snippets that are, really good on like coffee mugs, bumper stickers. You've heard me talk about this before. The things that, end up on the bottom of a fast food cup. They're so prevalent, especially in, more evangelical contexts, that we may have even been surprised when they showed up in this strange little story about a nighttime visit to Jesus by Nicodemus. Those concepts are born again and John 3:16, and they have a life of their own, and they function culturally in America on a completely different plane, separate from the pericope into which they're nestled. When we say born again, there is a line between those who use that particular language and those who don't. You know what I'm talking about. For some of us, this may have made our skin crawl or sent off all kinds of warnings. And if your check engine light has gone off due to me mentioning born again, you may have experienced this particular concept being used to denote who has made it into the in crowd with Jesus. Nicodemus in this morning's text has come by the cover of night. Nick at night. There is an implicit understanding that this visit could cost Nicodemus his own standing within his social circle, so it's not an encounter that can happen in broad daylight, out in the streets. But Nicodemus is seeking. He senses there's more, and he's reaching out to Jesus to find out what that more might be, but is held back by some of the in-crowd stuff of his own context that he hasn't quite figured out how to let go of, right? The very first thing Jesus says to him, he misunderstands. Jesus tells Nicodemus that one must be born from above in order to see the kingdom of God. Nicodemus is confused and wants to know how. I mean, he is very, very literal about this born again thing. Like, you can tell that the wheels, like the hamster wheel, is spinning, and he's like, but how do I go to the womb? Is it icky, right? But that's not what Jesus asked of him. Jesus has asked him to be born from spirit and from water, to be born from above. And birth is a painful, messy, beautiful process. Ask any doula, and they will tell you that it is impossible to know the exact way that a birth will go. Will this be a quick labor? Will it last 40 hours? Will the water break on its own? Or will there be a need for medical assistance or complications or a C-section? Even though there are ways to prepare and react to each of these scenarios, they are different from birth to birth. Being born of the Spirit like this, not everyone will reach this point in the same way. For some, the labor is long and agonizing, and there's more pushing and deep breaths that will be needed to sustain and ground you in the process because it's painful. The Spirit has a lot of work to do from within to form us before we're ready for birth. The other nugget from this pericope is John 3:16. We all know it well. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but may have eternal light. There's a definite us and them to John 3:16, though, right? Those who believe won't perish, which means that those who don't, well, sorry. But in order to avoid this, we have to take 3:16 and 3:17 together. They shouldn't be separated. Taking one without the other is deliberately creating, inside jokes and clubhouse rules and all of the things that make some of us feel unwelcome and uninvited. John 3:17 continues, "Indeed, God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him." Oh. To separate 16 and 17 is to condemn the world on God's behalf. To keep them intact is to remember that Jesus isn't only for some folks, and belief isn't a secret handshake or using words like charisma that will open up the pearly gates. The whole world is under the umbrella of who Jesus came to save. It's not a missionary conquest call to make everyone convert. This is just salvation by being part of the created world. This is all the families of the earth. This is for those who are quickly, easily, and painlessly born of the Spirit, and for those who have a long, messy, painful birth, who after all that pushing and Lamaze might even start out maybe a little jaundiced at first. Hopefully no meconium. That stuff is no joke. But it covers the whole spectrum, including those who never go into labor. God is compassionate. God is loving. Jesus was not here to be used as some golden ticket to be admitted to Willy Wonka heaven, or, back to my original point, to be spoken of in insider-only exclusive language, like eschatological manifestation of the ground of our being. Indeed, right? That's not it. We're all on the list of those to whom God is a benevolent patron. We all have access, no matter who we are or where we are on life's journey, even if we're showing up at Jesus's door, Nick at Night style. Blessings to you this morning.